this junior talent creation program called Dev10. We have a cybersecurity strategic programs group, and we have an ERP practice, which happens to be the group that I manage, that focuses on ERP tier one global behemoths. We do full project life cycles, evaluations, implementations, upgrades, and support of packaged software, and no big surprise, big focus in cloud migrations. However, we're not here to talk about ERP cloud migrations. That's a webinar for another time, the next time. Now, I want to introduce our partner and panel here, and I'll start with Gerard Blockdyke. Gerard is the founder and president of the Order Service. Company was founded in 2000, and they are a management consulting firm that helps C-level executives and their advisors, like Genesis10, identify the important project blind spots through self-assessment guides and books that they've authored and developed, and consultations. Gerard works on key strategic issues, is a technologist, technical background, and a former CIO. Also with Gerard is Ivanka Menken. I think we can pick out which one is Ivanka. Ivanka is the co-founder and CEO of the Order Service. She has more than 20 years of management consulting experience and education degree and background. She specializes in creating organizations that manage their business process maturity improvement in a sustainable and customer-driven manner. The Order Service has delivered projects globally, primarily in the United States, but additionally in Australia, where they hail from, the Netherlands, New Zealand, and Canada, and they've done this in both the commercial and the public sector. Last but not least is John Vigier. John is from Genesis10, our strategic programs group that I referenced earlier. John is the senior technology leader, and he's led, designed, and executed projects with the highest level of complexity and impact. And he's going to go into two examples, I was going to say stories today. John has a master's and a doctorate in data science. He's certified on 4 different cloud platforms. He's worked on 4 continents, speaks 5 languages, happens to be an accomplished pilot who was in the Air Force and served in the first Gulf War. Thank you for your service, John. He's a published author, volunteer firefighter, and an ordained minister, for those who want to get married out there. And I will add, from working with him the last 2 years, he's a heck of a nice guy and a great partner, and I really enjoy working with you, John. Okay, so to set the stage and introduce our first speaker, let me say that there are many reasons why projects fail. Reasons include inaccurate requirements, management or business leadership not being committed to the project, insufficient team resources, lack of accountability to make timely and quality decisions, lack of investment in change management, lack of training and support, lack of funding, insufficient data cleansing, it's all about the data, insistence on making the new application look like the old legacy application, and a lack of testing. There's one big common thread amongst all of these in these projects, that is a lack of planning. With that, as my opening remark, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker. But first, I want to make a quick housekeeping or 2 housekeeping comments. First, each speaker is going to introduce the next, as an FYI. And John, who's batting cleanup, is then going to turn it back over to me, and I'm going to entertain Q&A. So we're allowing time for questions and answers at the end. However, if you wish to ask a question, a clarifying question, when each speaker speaks, when they finish, please feel free to do so. We just ask that you do it via the chat feature in your particular platform, Zoom or LinkedIn. So again, we're allowing time at the end for questions. If you want to ask a clarifying question, feel free. I'll be monitoring the chat room, and I have people prompting me to look out for it, and we'll take the time in between to make sure your question is answered. So as I just said, common thread in what I commented on is the lack of planning. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, turn it over to Ivanka Menken. Ivanka?
Thanks, Mitch. And I did set a timer, so we should be good to go. If Genesis10 can give me screen sharing abilities, then I can show my presentation. That would be good, because otherwise I can talk about it, but then you don't have any images to look at.
But it would know we are streaming live here.
We are streaming live. You know, things always happen when you do live streaming. Okay, so there we go. We are live. Thank you so much for that introduction, Mitch. And yes, my name is Ivanka Menken. I'm the CEO and co-founder of The Art of Service. And the purpose of my presentation is to show you how a self-assessment actually strengthens and supports the planning part of your project. So why is a self-assessment so important? So let's dive in a little bit deeper into this issue. We need a self-assessment because honestly, our strategy, including our cloud migration strategy, needs to be built on what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. And this lack of understanding can really hinder your ability to set up an efficient, effective, within budget, cost effective project. And it also hinders the ability to predict the outcomes of your project. And even as a worst case scenario, these assumptions can damage your project results. It can be the reason you build a project based on wrong assumptions and you're spending money and resources on something that you didn't even need in the first place. But before you start looking at your project and you're looking at your self-assessment questions that you want to use, let's have a quick chat about maturity levels. Because for those of us who have been in project management and process management, we all know garbage in, garbage out. So you need to understand your maturity levels in your organization before you start a migration, because you need to understand what you migrate and whether or not your organization is ready to migrate. So recognize that there's a need for cloud migration and define what that means in your organization. Then check if you have the ability to measure all your activities and analyze the results so that you can structurally improve your processes all the way through, with the end result being able to control every step, every activity, all the triggers for your processes so that you can sustain the same level of quality and deliverables to your internal and external customers and clients, whether or not you're migrated to the cloud or not. That's the end result, because that's what's going to make you sleep better at night, because you can predict the outcomes, you can sustain the outcomes, and you know exactly what's going to happen. Well, that's the ideal scenario. So we need to understand what we're dealing with. And that's where the self-assessment comes in. So this self-assessment, and we've created a self-assessment for a lot of situations. And in this case, I'm showing you a couple of the questions from the self-assessment for cloud migration. Out of the 800 to 1,000 question in each of the questionnaires, you choose the questions that work for your particular project, for your particular brief, for your particular outcome that you want to achieve. And, looking at these questions, you may think, these are a little bit general or simple or simplistic. But remember that the overarching question, like the question behind these questions, is, in my belief, and I'm reading from the screen now, the answer to the following question is clearly defined. So for each of these questions, do you have a clearly defined answer? For example, how to calculate the true cost of cloud migration. Do you have a clearly defined answer to that question? Or will there be additional HR cost related to this particular migration? Do you have a clearly defined answer? Because you answer it whether or not you have a clearly defined answer, you can then rank your answer from a 1 to 5, from totally disagree to totally agree. And this will help you to understand the gaps in your processes. This will help you to understand the heroes in your organizations, the resources you can use internally, because those are the people that would have answered this with a 5, like totally agree. We have clearly defined answers. And those are the resources that are going to help you save money. So how do you do these assessments? Like, you can obviously use a trusted advisor. like a consultant organization like Genesis10, who have a very intimate knowledge of these assessments and understand the rationale behind the questions, the questionnaires, and how to use them. But you can also use it as a do-it-yourself option. But then the most important part is reading the data, analyzing the data. And in this organization, you can see that, the different colors are the different answers that people have been giving. So it goes from the lavender color being strongly disagree to the purple color being strongly agree. And you see that in this recognize, define, and measure area, people are really confident, whereas in the analyze, improve, and control area, they're not very confident. So this organization talks about migration a lot, but is not very mature, not very confident in the processes to help them actually analyze, improve, and control that migration. Then my final slide is to help you to keep the momentum in your project going, is to focus on the must-have critical criteria. So what are the critical criteria that you need to have in place to manage your project and to manage your cloud migration, not just now, but also in the future? So these are the must-have critical capabilities and the questions to ask. But who do you ask these questions to, and who do you include in your project? Well, that's where Gerard comes in, and he's now going to show you his example of how he uses all this data, all this information that you get from your self-assessment and your critical capabilities into a knowledge management model for your projects. So I put it over to Gerard.
Thank you, Ivanka. I'm going to share my screen now because I'm going to show you the knowledge graph for, there we go. Can you see this? Yep. I'm going to show you the knowledge graph for cloud migration we have built. I'm going to reload it so you can see how it's all being put together. While this is happening, let me tell you a little bit about the background of all of this, of what you're looking at. It was an autumn day somewhere in the late 90s that my CIO called me into his office, and he said, I'm being called upon a larger task in the organization, which is they were privatizing back then. It was a utility company. They were privatizing, and they need to manage the privatization. As of day after tomorrow, you're my replacement CIO. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night because I didn't know what I didn't know. I got thrust into the CIO seat with a 30 million budget and a privatization on the way. So it was a massive day and a massive year for that. My main concern was, obviously we had our professional advisors like the Gartners and the Foresters, etc., available to us, but I didn't know what I didn't know, and that made me uncomfortable. So that laid the foundation, that built the foundation for future AI and machine learning to have that in place to make sure that all the activities that we wanted to do were guided by critical capabilities, by questions, by prioritization. So that's something that we needed to have in place. So a little bit about the AI background that we started building back then, and that has come to what you're seeing right now. Any AI needs to start with a canon to learn and turn data into knowledge. A lot of organizations use, for instance, Wikipedia or Gutenberg or sensor data that builds a canon as well. Our canon adapts and it grows 24/7 a day to ever evolving role requirements out there. And demands in the market of our Fortune 500 clients in high-tech, business, management, enterprise strategies. So the AI learns from this canon. It builds critical capabilities. Those are the ones that you see here that you've seen in the last sheet that Ivanka showed you, the Kanban sheet, their assessment questions and the relations between them. So if I zoom out a bit, you get to see the whole enchilada and their relations between them. So now we have built in-house algorithms that have their foundation in NLP, like proximity, density, also requirements for hiring that show you how everything is connected, and build that into a knowledge graph, Kanban, and a database. So the result is what you see here. You can compare the result to a Google search showing you the most impactful results first, and this enables our Fortune 500 clients to act on them and thousands of other high-tech management, enterprise, and business topics. For cloud migration, this is the knowledge graph, and what you're looking at are a lot of balls and their connection. The big blue ones, those are the critical capabilities, like Ivanka has shown you in the previous slide of the Kanban. So those are the critical capabilities. There's 2,000 activities that need to be done for cloud migration to be successful, that you need to focus on for cloud migration to be successful. Those are the blue balls. The pink balls, a lot of them as well, are the control questions. So those are the questions that you'll be asking to make sure that you have those activities in place, to make sure that you're doing those activities in the right way. And they're prioritized, and those are the green balls that you see here and there. The prioritization is based on the AI and the algorithm, based on proximity, density, requirements for job roles in an organization. The red balls, those are the most important questions to ask, and that's what I'm going to finish up my presentation with, to show you quickly what the most important questions are to ask. This knowledge graph is available. The Kanban is available in the link that you see here on the top of my screen, Cloud Migration Kanban. It'll also be in the show notes and in a follow-up email that we'll send after this. You can play around with it and do everything with the data that you like and prefer. So this is the whole enchilada, the whole meat and potatoes, as we say. Before we dive into the actual activities that you need to be doing, let's focus quickly on what kind of topics that you need to be covering when you're doing a cloud migration, what you need to be looking at. Now, this is the whole thing, so you can't read anything. That's why I'm going to zoom in a bit and pan over it, and you can have a look at what's in there. So there's a lot of activities that we need to be covering when we're doing a cloud migration, that we need to be sure that we're taking the right approach in. So just click on one, we'll see what we need to do here. And this is how the knowledge graph then unfolds and shows you what you need to be doing and what kind of questions you need to be asking and how prioritized it is. This is helpful to me to actually give me an idea of what activities I need to be covering and doing in my cloud migration project. The cloud migration project needs to be covering processes and activities. So if I want to be looking at the processes and activities that are in place, and I'll limit that to the top 10 processes and activities that are in place, and I got a typo here, that are in place, are this one. What are the top 10 that are in place? These are the priority questions. Hang on. There. These are the priority questions of a cloud migration project that needs to be in place. So these are the top 10 questions that you need to be answering out of the Kanban and out of the knowledge graph that show you what you need to be covering. So for example, how does your organization, which has migrated or deployed workloads into the public cloud, now manage, secure, and understand this data, traversing the public cloud? If I look into that, I'll dive into the activities that need to be done here. So we assure that our organization manages relationships with software and hardware vendors to understand the potential architectural impact of different vendor strategies and data acquisitions. Now, what's helpful here in the Kanban and the critical capabilities and this knowledge graph is it shows me what the relationships are between everything that I need to be doing for a successful cloud migration. So the top 10 most important questions and the questions that I need to be asking to my staff, to my vendors, to my data architect in this instance, to make sure that we're offering the right approach to a cloud migration project. So these are the top 10 most important questions. If I limit that to 3, I'm going to limit it to 3, so we'll get a good overview of what we need to be doing. These are the top 3 questions that we need to be asking when we're doing a successful cloud migration project based on all the criteria and questions that are in the knowledge graph up to 2000. So number 1, do you have the personnel and expertise needed to manage your own cloud migration and ongoing operations? The activity that we need to be doing is work with data owners to provide technical guidance and solution on data ontology, best migration path, and entitlement. So look forward and make sure that you cover all the areas in your best migration path forward. How does data center consolidation and optimization fit into the cloud migration plans for your organization? So that's where you look into a broader into the broader aspect of the cloud migration effort. So you guarantee that your staff has involvement in development of long-term database strategies for the enterprise environment, stay current with current technology and provide the required functionality to the organization, and as well as adherence to change control procedures and policies. Makes perfect sense to have change control in place for your cloud migration process, but also after that. What we often see is that a cloud center of excellence is put in place to make sure that all the activities are managed across all your cloud platforms, and not just AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud Platform, but also cloud platforms like Oracle, for instance. How have the results of migration to cloud-enabled solutions compared to expectations? So build a forward-looking roadmap for your cloud migration process of high importance, and something that's often not very considered in depth. We start migrating an application to the cloud and we do it step by step. We don't look always at how everything is connected to the impact of the activity that we're doing. So holistic, have a look at it in a holistic kind of way. So how do you do that? You review and finalize reference architectures for cloud native high performance environments, designing business solutions in cloud, developing deployment, migration, operation, and monitoring guides. So these are the top 3 questions that you need to be asking yourself before you start looking at a cloud migration project. And the main goal is here to have a holistic overview of what you need to be doing. Now, when I unpack these 3 most important questions, it'll give me a quick roadmap of what actually I need to be doing in my organization in total. And I'll unpack this one, first one. A control question I can be asking here is, what about multiple simultaneous migration? And I can be asking that of the principal Scrum Master who takes care of the migration process. Then this one, unpack this one. Guarantee your staff has involvement. Are you moving business critical data or functionality to the cloud? And unpack the last one. So the 3 most important questions I have unpacked now is the data throughput to the cloud enough to ensure good performance. So now here, if I zoom out a bit, here, what I often do, what we often do with clients is when we start out the project is that we get the top 3 prioritized questions. These are the ones and the activities that need to be in place. You can get them in the Kanban as well. And we print this out. We laminate that, we hang them on the wall, and we make sure that everyone's on the right page to make sure that these are the activities that we need to be doing. These are the questions that we need to be asking ourselves. You can also see that these are the yellow balls here. Those are the Kanban swim lanes. If you're familiar with Kanbans, they work with swim lanes, so activities that need to be done, all combined and grouped together. This is combined and grouped in the data activity, the cloud activity, and a third one here, that one is also in the data activity. You see the prioritization here, the highest priorities. You'll also see what I've started out with and shown you before, the related areas, IT product line management, cloud adoption, and this one is IT product line management as well. The related areas that you need to be focusing on. This gives you a great overview of what you actually need to be doing in a cloud migration project. You also see the must-have ball here. All 3 of them are related to must-have, and that's a prioritization that's built in with the AI and machine learning that pops up these critical capabilities that you need to be doing and these questions that you need to be asking of your organization. Now, when I ask this question, this control question, what about multiple simultaneous migration? I ask that to the principal Scrum Master. When I'm talking to that person, that job role, these are other questions I can ask the job role. So that's all the data that's in there, really helpful right away to make sure that all these areas are covered. And I can do that with the other ones as well. Gives you an idea of what's in there. Business architect, senior analyst, product owner. I talk to the product owner, there you go. Involve the product owner. These are all the questions I need to be asking of that product owner. So this gives you a great idea of what to do for the cloud migration, and it's really helpful, hands-on, to have a cloud migration project in place with this as a guide, the self-assessment as a guide, the Kanban as a guide, the knowledge graph that we're looking at right here as a guide to make sure that you're doing the right things and everyone is on the same page. This is prioritized, ready for you, ready to go. And we use this in projects all the time to make it way easier to not forget anything, and made me sleep better at night when I got thrown into the CIO seat many years ago. That was me for now. With the meat and potatoes, I'm going to hand it over to John, who's going to dive into practical projects for cloud migration. Thank you. John, over to you.
Hang on, John. Before you start, I was just asked 2 questions. I'm going to forward one and ask Ivanka or Gerard, why do I need to use a self-assessment prior to an implementation? You're on mute. Would we unmute Ivanka, please? Yeah, it's not Ivanka. I had the same problem.
Yeah, no, I'm here. You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Cool. Self-assessment prior to the implementation. Good question. It's, like I said in my presentation, like it's a great tool to use as a strategic starting point for your implementation project, because doing an assessment like this really uncovers the gaps in your processes. And also, maybe even more importantly, where you're making decisions, executive decisions based on assumptions, because you're asking multiple people the same question and you're asking for opinions. Like, in your opinion, do you have a clearly defined answer to this question? And what you'll notice is that it really clearly shows up the lack of communication, or the lack of trickle down of communication throughout the organization. Because some people in the organization will say like, yep, clearly defined answer, not a problem, works perfectly. Whereas other clusters in the organization or in your project team will go like, I don't even understand the question. So it really clearly shows up where the gaps are and where the potential issues are moving into your project. So that's the importance of doing the assessment, to help you avoid issues later down the track.
Okay. Now let's go back to John. John?
Thanks, Mitch. Appreciate it. So I'm going to share my presentation now. My name is John Vijay. I'm a principal with Genesis10 Strategic Programs. And I am a technologist, I promise. So I wanted to speak with you guys about some of the real life experiences that we've had. We've selected 2 of such migrations that we'd like to speak about today. So in looking at the failure scenarios, what happens, what goes wrong in some of the migration projects, Gartner put out a study last year about collecting information from their various clients and what had gone wrong, right? What didn't go according to plan, what messed up. They came up with a lot of data, a lot of good, positive feedback on this. They thought that perhaps it was the wrong team, staffing questions, the wrong emphasis, maybe a mistimed work effort, maybe some corners were cut, rushing into decisions, rushing into designs, poor design decisions, and some other things that they came up with. And the reality is, much respect to Gartner, I think the world of them, but I think they've actually kind of got it wrong on this one, which primarily wrong with a lot of these migration projects is that they don't do planning properly. And I think this actually answers to a certain extent the question that was asked, why do you do the assessment before the migration? Well, I think it's a matter of putting the cart before the horse, or not putting the cart before the horse. You need to understand exactly what you're about to do. You need to have a roadmap clearly defined. And the reason we get into some of these planning issues is because we don't ask a lot of these questions. We don't do these assessments. So case in point, an implementation project that we did some years ago for a large US governmental organization, which deals a lot with logistics. The pain points for them is they have what they call their first line, which is a centralized phone number where a majority of their clients are directed when they need help with changing their customer information, help with changing their orders. And they noticed over time that the hold times were increasing drastically. And this particular organization was impacted greatly by the COVID pandemic. It caused them to do a lot more business than they were used to, not just a 10 or 20% increase, a threefold increase in a matter of months. So all of this boiled up to a kind of a perfect storm, and they decided to do two things. They decided that they were going to replace some of these call-in customers with chatbots, and these chatbots allowed customers to ask questions in plain wording and get answers to them that would direct them in the right location. Now, they had started looking at this before all of this happened, but the key to this being a cloud migration is they figured out that in order to deliver these chatbots quicker and more efficiently, the key to doing this was developing them and delivering them in the cloud. So we migrated 100%, or the plan was to migrate all of these workloads. In this particular case, this was to Google Cloud, to GCP. Unfortunately, and we see this with a lot of projects, it's got a job security for some of us, but where it went wrong is the perfect storm that I just spoke about that created this need and that heightened this demand. Well, it caused them to rush into decisions. It caused them to rush into designs. They wanted so badly to be able to deliver and deliver quickly that they cut a few corners here and there. And unfortunately, it's a pretty dire setback for projects. They also made a lot of assumptions about their staff's capability to meet the new demand, meet the new technologies. It's great to be able to develop all of these things when you're on-prem, when you're in a data center. It's a lot different when you're doing this in a containerized hosting site that's off in the cloud. So they made a lot of assumptions. This became really the height of the crisis, and when we speak of this perfect storm. We had participated on this project up to this point in a consultative fashion, primarily as staff augmentation. When this bubbled up and got the visibility that it did, and when I say visibility, I'm talking about press conferences. And so that's more than just an internal storm bubbling up. That's when it starts impacting more than that. So what we proposed to executives of this organization was for us to come in there and recommend a go to green plan. We are accustomed to doing what we call PMRs, project management reviews. And through these PMRs, we have an opportunity to assess where things are and hopefully steer the ship in the right compass direction. So primarily, the point of this PMR is to pause everything, right? It's where you can't, when you have moving goalposts and when everything is a million miles an hour, it's kind of hard to assess a moving target. So what's important is to take a time out and assess really where you are, have an honest discussion about where was this baseline, where were we going. We also use this opportunity to redefine responsibilities, right? I think in some of the corners that were cut, certain people were put in places of responsibility that they weren't really ready. And it's unfair to them, and it was unfair to the organization as well. From that, we used all of this information in an assessment to produce an updated plan, a realistic updated plan. We also used that opportunity to define stricter communication protocols, reporting protocols, and also how things get escalated and how things get prioritized. If you take this as a bundle of artifacts, it needs to be shared with the right people at the right time, and it needs to be shared in the right light. The key word to doing this is making sure that it's realistic. And so having gathered all of that data, we then set out on a course to socialize it to the right folks. Honest conversations, brutally honest conversations. This turned out to be a success. This project turned out to be a success. It doesn't happen to all of them, but it did happen for this one. We correctly reset what our estimations were in terms of work, in terms of durations, in terms of personnel expectations. We also created a giant matrix of staff to need to training. And in this matrix, we were able to identify how to properly shore up the right additional capacity, as well as to implement some training opportunities. We then created also a project management reporting dashboard where we were able to showcase exactly where we were, what we were doing, and how we were progressing. We actually turned this into success, as I mentioned. It doesn't happen to all of them, but that was for this particular client a big deal, and it actually it helped us not only retain the level of partnership that we have with this client, but we were able to grow it considerably after that. The second story that I have to share with you is an implementation project of a little bit different perspective. The first one that we spoke of was really a need-based. There was a very specific, very well-defined scope. My business has tripled. I need to quickly address it. This is a little bit different because this arrived to us in the form of a new CIO taking his seat at this particular organization. This is a financial services, financial counseling company that had not too long before this split from its parent organization and had privatized. And so in this ecosystem, in this newfound role that this person found himself in, one of the things which is often what has to be done at this point is a cut in total cost of ownership. And they had a ginormous, I know that's not a word, but they had a substantial footprint in terms of cost for their total cost of ownership. They also had several challenges in being able to staff appropriately with some of these legacy technologies, because it's simply harder to find staffing, and it's not as easy to keep and retain that staff. We participated in this RFP. We proposed a solution which was to divide and conquer. And what I mean by that is you can't convert and rewrite everything. You can't forklift everything. The happy medium is somewhere where the business critical applications, where we, through assessments, were able to find the priority ones that needed to be rewritten. And then the remainder we lift and shifted using things such as virtual machines, containerizations, RDS, etc. This project, unfortunately, like many of them do, went in the wrong direction. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but the primary factors that contributed to this challenge was that there were really autonomous business units amongst this client that were independent, right? When I say autonomous, think of individual little fiefdoms. And these folks really had never truly met in the middle, never had really positive conversations between job security, between hesitancy with new technology. They just never managed to meet in the middle. They had a lot of issues also with some of these folks who found themselves in positions that they hadn't had before. And staff members who were junior or moderately junior found themselves in positions of making design decisions and technology decisions that they just weren't equipped to do. A little bit different than the last story that I presented. We also intervened in this case through a PMR, through a project management review. This was a little bit different though. We had better communication inside this project. We had better documentation. What we didn't have was an even spreading of this information amongst the concerned parties. And so what we proposed as part of this shoring up plan, part of this corrective action, was to centralize all of these projects into one giant program that we would place in the hands of a very capable PMO that was co-chaired between the client and us. Through that PMO, we were able to capture more accurate baselines. Although this was not as big of a problem with this particular client as it was in the previous experience. We used proactive communication to make sure that we told the accurate story, told the real story of what was going on, and reset these expectations. And that's part of the challenge when you have these disparate management enclaves that are spread amongst the enterprise. You get different stories. So we had to shore up those communications, and we had to reset those expectations through a more centralized form of communication. the CIO who found themselves in this new position came from the industrial space. Think big machines, big plants, and he brought something to this, which you have to give credit where it's due. I think it was a brilliant idea. The idea of health of the plant. If for any of you that are on this webinar that are familiar with the industrial space, health of the plant is something that's used for, you've probably seen it in some places where it's an indicator that says 180 days without an accident. That is part of the data that goes into health of the plant. It is a consolidation of a bunch of different sensors in data collection activities that happen in a particular plant that tell you truly how well the plant is doing. Are you short on parts? Are you short on human resources? Are you short on suppliers? Is your logistics, your distribution system impeded in any way? This idea of the health of the plant, we reworded it in here for health of the program, but it really is health of the plant that we stole this idea from or borrowed, is the idea that in a centralized location, people can easily and quickly find up, kind of like a heads up display, how their projects are doing, how their program is doing. In a similar fashion to the government organization that we helped in the previous story, we also identified some training opportunities, and we actually made use of our own internal training program, which is called Dev10, which Mitch introduced when he introduced this webinar. And we put our program at their disposal to be able to create training opportunities and satisfy those training needs. The success factor, we had to quickly turn course in this because there was a privatization, there was an IPO that went along with this, and it was very important to be able to quickly show a return on investment. That's the heartbeat of this company. So we focused on a few key areas of focus, and we really put blinders on to get results as soon as possible for those particular areas. Another success factor was the centralization, right? The creation of a common forum kind of in the middle of everybody, which allowed us to not only be able to report more accurately and communicate more effectively, but it also helped us spread particular portions of the strategy and particular portions of the design to the disparate parts of this business. This dashboard that we created also, as it turns out, because of interesting times that we faced at that time, it also allowed us to create meaningless sharing of information, which was really appreciated by the client and quickly undertaken in other parts of their business as well. We managed to create a pipeline of trained and readily available staffing resources through the training program. I do want to mention that before I close, and I think that this also goes into answering the question that was done before. The planning process, making sure that you have all your ducks in a row, right? I'm sure all of you guys are familiar with this expression, is critically important. You found through both of these stories that a key ingredient to the recipe that is a successful migration project is the ability to know where you are, know where you're going. And that doesn't happen without a certain amount of planning. I appreciate being able to share these stories with you. My time is up and I'll turn it over to Mitch. Thank you so much.
Okay. There are a handful of questions that have come in. I'll go back and forth between John and 10 and order of service. I'll start with you, John. Are there warning signs of when migration projects go off the rails?
There are, but it would be silly for me to say that there's 1 through 5 of these warning things that you need to watch. The reality is none of us have a crystal ball. What you can do, however, I'm reminded of my time in the Air Force. When I started in the Air Force, I was in the weather service, and I learned about systems that gather data that help you make informed decisions. Are you going to be right 100% of the time? No, absolutely not. We know this because we also see weather reports. But there is data that you can acquire. There's information that you can harvest that will help you in formulating this idea of, are you going in the right direction or not? It is not an exact science, but it can be. You can reduce the number of by increasing the amount of information that you gather about how well you're doing. So while there are no simple answers to that, there are a lot of things that you can do to increase your level of intelligence about how well your project is doing.
Thank you. For the art of service, yes?
Yeah, Mitch, can I just jump in? Because
Yes.
when John was talking, he triggered a thought in my mind. Because in your second example, John, you were talking about this CIO that really needed to, and that project needed to work on expectation management and making sure that the scope of the project is really clear. And I just wanted to touch on that planning component, like the self-assessment really will help with that expectation management, because you create an assessment based on the scope that you want to do your project on, and you select the questions. So you delete all the questions that are out of scope. You select the questions based on that scope, and that will then become a communication tool, and you can use the assessment, the self-assessment, to identify who in the organization is on board with the communication and who isn't. So it's really an opportunity to get everybody on the same page and to really clearly create that clarity. I mean, that seems to be the word of the moment for me, at least, is to create clarity on why are we doing this project? What do we want to achieve? What is within scope? What is outside of scope? So that's where that proactive communication starts. At least that's what I was thinking when John was talking about that second project.
Okay. Let me ask you, Ivanka and Gerard, I'll make it a two-parter because I believe it's a yes or no question number one. Am I able to change the questions or delete questions?
Yes.
And part two, assuming that was the answer, is how do I get the toolkits?
Well, there's two ways. You either engage a consultant or a trusted advisor that has the toolkits, knows how to work with the toolkits, and has experience with it and training in using the toolkits. Genesis10, or if you're more of a do-it-yourself organization, go to our store, store.theartofservice.com. All the toolkits are there, or just contact us and we'll find the right toolkit for you.
There are many. I will attest to that. Thank you. I'll go back to John. One question, the last one I see for you right now. What can I do to prevent my projects from going in the wrong direction? That's a loaded one. You're muted. Unmute John, please.
This is I wasn't allowed to speak in my defense. No. Are there things you can do? Yes, there are a lot of things you can do. One of them is to go through these assessments, but that's only part of the answer. Really partnering with folks who know how to get to that answer, who know how to avoid these issues, is one way to do it. Being informed, being educated. But I think some of this too is a personal answer, right? You have to be honest with yourself about how much you're able to do if you have or do not have some of this information. And I think that my message as an answer to that question is, yes, it's the assessments. Yes, it's the additional information. Yes, it's the data gathering. Yes, it's a lot of the things that we've discussed. But also some of that comes from an honest assessment of your capability in whatever role that you may have. Are you able to do this to the best extent of your ability without this information, right? And I think there's some self-reflection on how you answer that. And I encourage you guys to have that thought. It says, honestly with yourself, can I really do this? And wouldn't the organization or the company be better served by me educating myself and giving an honest answer to that question?
Okay, thank you. I see a few more for the art of service. What is the difference between the self-assessment and the critical capability Kanban? Kanban. Unmute Gerard, please.
I'll take that one. Originally, we started out with the self-assessments, and the self-assessment is the foundation of everything that we've built. All the self-assessments. The self-assessment, like Ivanka has shown you, come with criteria, so questions to ask, and they're prioritized as further you go in the maturity curve. So those are based on questions, but logically, what we got with clients is they were also asking for what kind of answers do we need to be looking for when we are asking those questions to our vendors, in our organization, to our stakeholders. What kind of answers do we need to be looking for? So that's when we started building the critical capabilities database as well, that is aligned to the self-assessment questions. So the self-assessments are the questions, the criteria to figure out where you are, where you want to go. If you need more hand-holding to figure out what you actually need to be putting in place, then you can have a look at the Kanban and use those with the prioritized criteria to make sure that you cover everything as well from that perspective. So both are complementary. You start out with a self-assessment. If you grow further down the track, or you want to have an easier flight path, you'll take the Kanban and the knowledge graph that I just showed you.
One additional question. I only see questions in the assessment. Where are the answers?
Again, the questions are in the assessment. The answers are in the Kanban.
Any others out there? I will ask, what is the AI aspect of your self-assessment tool?
The AI aspect is that it's hard to figure out what the prioritization is of each and every criteria, so each and every question, where it is on a maturity scale, and how it is related to a critical capability and what the critical capability actually is. So the AI does a couple of things. It builds the questions and it builds the critical capability. And it prioritizes those, and it does that over not just cloud migration, but over close to 3,000 different topics. So we're literally talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of records in total. So that's what the AI does. It figures out what goes where and what's related to what, and it creates and builds continuously 24/7 new criteria and questions that go with it.
Mitch, can I just touch on what John said earlier with the successes or the reasons why projects fail and how to pull projects back? Because one of the things John mentioned was that you need to be clear and honest about your ability to do the project. And you were asking before, like, why are there only questions? Why are there no answers? Well, I know we all want the answers, but sometimes you don't have the answers, and it can be very confrontational to actually have somebody ask you a question that you don't have the answer to. And doing these self-assessments, the reason why there are so many questions is actually the whole activity of asking the question and having the conversation and having the discussion within your project team or your executive team to go like, hang on, do we, like, honestly, truly, do we have a clearly defined answer to this? And it's holding up a mirror to you personally in your professional, where you are in your career, but also holding up a mirror to your organization. Do we have a clearly defined answer to this? And if the answer is no, should we go ahead with this project right now? Or should we involve external experts or resources? Or is there another path forward? So the true value of the question is asking the question and understanding that you may not know the answer. It's confrontational, it's scary, but it's really helpful.
Well said, and a great point. Being mindful of the time, are there other questions that anybody wants to ask? I'm looking, I don't really see another right now. We only have being, as I just said, mindful of the time, 3 minutes left. I didn't introduce up front, but I really want to thank our panel, John, Ivanka, Gerard. What I didn't say up front is that it was 6 a.m. in Australia when we started this at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So thank you, Gerard and Ivanka, for doing it at such an ungodly hour for most of us, because it is an odd time to start a webinar at 4 p.m. on the East Coast here, 3 Central, 1 Pacific. I want to thank the audience, for everyone here, Zoom and LinkedIn, for joining us. I don't think there's any last questions. So again, panel, thank you very much. I hope everybody found this enjoyable, a bit educational, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, team. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.